The desert sun hung low over Red Hollow Ridge, pouring molten gold across miles of cracked earth and brittle sagebrush. Dust curled lazily along the trail where horses had passed hours earlier, and the distant cry of a hawk echoed across the canyon walls like a warning nobody intended to hear. Levi Crow rode alone beneath that sky, the leather of his saddle creaking softly with every rhythmic step of his stallion, Ironshade. Levi preferred it that way alone. The desert, with all its dangers and silent threats, made more sense to him than people ever had. His wide brim hat shielded his eyes from the sun, but it couldn't shield him from memories. Nothing ever could. He had built a reputation across 3 territories. They called him the Hollow Crow, a gunslinger who didn't miss, a bounty hunter who didn't hesitate, and a man who rarely spoke unless his voice carried consequences. His name alone settled arguments in saloons and stopped outlaws mid-sentence. Yet, Levi carried no pride in it. Reputation was simply armor. Armor was survival. As Ironshade slowed near a dried creek bed, Levi noticed movement by the rocks. His hand instinctively hovered over the ivory grip of his revolver. Out here, movement meant trouble. Ambush or desperation, sometimes all 3 tangled together. The figure emerged slowly, and Levi's eyes narrowed. It wasn't a bandit. It wasn't even a man. It was a girl. She stood barefoot in the dust, her dress torn at the hem and her face smudged with dirt and dried tears. She couldn't have been older than 10. Tangled dark hair clung to her cheeks as she stared at him. With eyes that held far too much silence for someone so young, Levi exhaled sharply, lowering his hand from his gun. "You lost, kid," he called out, his voice gravelly from years of dust and whiskey. The girl didn't answer. She just stared. Levi shifted in his saddle, already calculating the inconvenience. Town was 12 miles west. He had a bounty waiting. East. Time was money. Compassion was expensive. Got no business standing in the middle of nowhere. He muttered, turning Ironshade slightly. "Head west. You'll hit Mercy Creek before sundown." He expected her to move. She didn't. Instead, she took a single step closer. Levi scoffed under his breath and nudged his horse forward, riding past her. He didn't look back until Ironshade snorted uneasily. When he did, his jaw tightened. The girl was following him. Levi rode another half-mile before stopping abruptly. Ironshade pawed the ground, irritated by the sudden halt. Levi twisted in his saddle and stared at the child trudging behind him, her small feet kicking up soft clouds of dust with every step. She wasn't crying. She wasn't calling for help. She was simply walking steadily, stubbornly, like she had nowhere else to go and no intention of stopping. "You planning on wearing out those feet?" Levi called. She said nothing. He cursed quietly and swung down from his horse. The desert wind tugged at his coat as he approached her, up close. He noticed bruises along her arms and the hollow sharpness in her cheeks. That spoke of hunger stretching across days, maybe weeks. "You got a name?" he asked. A pause stretched between them like drawn wire. Finally, her lips parted slightly. "Clara." Her voice was soft, fragile, but steady. "Well, Clara," Levi said, resting his hands on his hips. "You can't follow strangers through outlaw country. Folks out here ain't kind." She blinked at him, unmoving. "Where's your family?" Her silence answered him louder than words ever could. Levi rubbed the back of his neck, irritation mixing with something he didn't want to identify. He had buried sympathy years ago along with everything else that made life complicated. Yet something about her gaze unsettled him, not pleading, not scared, just fixed. "You can't ride with me," he said firmly. "I got dangerous business." Clara tilted her head slightly, as if considering his statement, then stepped past him and reached toward Ironshade. The stallion, known to bite strangers, lowered his head curiously toward her tiny hand. Levi stared, stunned. "That horse don't take to nobody," he muttered. Clara stroked Ironshade's nose gently. The horse snorted, almost approvingly. Levi sighed, a long defeated sound. "This is a bad idea," he whispered to himself. By sunset, Clara sat behind Levi in the saddle, her small hands clutching the back of his coat. He told himself it was temporary, just to Mercy Creek, just until he could hand her off to someone responsible. But even as he told himself that lie, he felt the unfamiliar weight of responsibility settle across his shoulders. They rode in silence, broken only by hoofbeats and the whisper of desert wind. Occasionally, Clara shifted slightly, careful not to disturb him. Levi noticed she never asked questions. She never complained. She simply held on like she trusted him completely. And that trust gnawed at him worse than any accusation could. When they reached a narrow canyon pass, Levi slowed Ironshade. His instincts prickled. Shadows stretched sharply along the rocks. He scanned the ridges carefully, every sense alert. "You stay quiet," he murmured. Clara nodded against his back. A rifle crack shattered the stillness. The bullet struck stone inches from Levi's head. Ironshade reared violently as Levi drew, his revolver in one fluid motion. 3 masked riders burst from behind boulders, their horses thundering forward with wild yells. "Bounty hunter," one shouted. "Hand over the saddlebag, and maybe we leave you breathing." Levi's eyes hardened. He twisted in the saddle, firing twice with terrifying precision. One outlaw dropped instantly. Ironshade bolted forward as Clara clung tightly. Dust exploded around them as gunfire echoed through the canyon. Levi rode like a storm incarnate, weaving through narrow stone corridors, returning fire with cold efficiency. Another outlaw tumbled from his horse. The last rider cursed and fled into the desert. Silence returned just as suddenly as it had been shattered. Levi slowed Ironshade, chest heaving. He turned slightly. "You all right?" Clara nodded. Her grip on his coat never loosened. They camped beneath a crooked juniper tree that night. Levi built a small fire while Clara sat nearby, watching every movement with quiet fascination. He handed her a tin cup of water and half his dried jerky. She accepted it with a small nod, eating slowly like she expected it to vanish if she hurried. "You ain't scared?" he asked suddenly. She glanced up at him, chewing thoughtfully before shaking her head. "Most folks scream when bullets start flying." She swallowed. "You didn't." Levi blinked, surprised by her bluntness. A reluctant smirk tugged at his lips. "Guess I been around bullets too long." The fire crackled between them as stars spread across the sky like spilled salt. For the first time in years, Levi felt the uncomfortable presence of companionship. He didn't know what to do with it. "Why'd you follow me?" he asked quietly. Clara stared into the flames. "You look like someone who didn't leave people behind." The words struck him harder than any fist ever had. He looked away quickly, jaw tightening. "You don't know me, kid," he muttered. "Maybe," she whispered, "but I know lonely when I see it." Levi didn't respond. He could in single quotes. Morning arrived cold and gray. Levi saddled Ironshade while Clara gathered fallen twigs to smother the fire, mimicking his actions from the night before. He watched her quietly, noticing how she moved carefully, deliberately, like someone who had learned survival the hard way. They reached Mercy Creek by noon, a tired settlement clinging to life between dry hills and stubborn optimism. Levi dismounted outside the general store, scanning for someone willing to take responsibility for a child. He spoke with the store owner, then the blacksmith, then the saloon keeper. Each conversation ended with polite refusal or helpless shrugs. Food was scarce. Times were hard. Another mouth to feed meant another risk. Levi stepped outside, frustration simmering. Clara sat on the wooden porch, swinging her bare feet slightly. When she saw his expression, she stopped swinging. "No one wants me," she said softly. The simplicity of her statement twisted something deep in Levi's chest. He looked toward the horizon where his bounty waited, where money and survival and routine lived. Then he looked at Clara, small and silent and stubbornly hopeful. He cursed under his breath. That evening, Levi stood beside Ironshade, staring west where the sun dipped below the desert. Like a fading promise, Clara stood nearby, watching him. Carefully, she didn't ask what he had decided. She didn't beg or plead. She simply waited. Levi removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair before placing it back on his head with deliberate finality. "You ride with me," he said, gruffly. "Just till I figure something better." Clara's eyes brightened slightly, though she only nodded. "But you listen," he added sternly. "You stay close. You do what I say when danger shows up. Understand? Yes, sir. He helped her onto the saddle, then climbed up in front of her. As Ironshade began walking out of Mercy Creek, Levi felt something unfamiliar settle into his bones. Not burden, not exactly. Something heavier, something fragile. Behind him, Clara rested her head lightly against his back. Levi Crow had taken her presence as a passing inconvenience, a stray moment in a harsh life carved from gun smoke and desert wind. He didn't realize yet that she would become the one thing he would fight harder for than his own survival. And somewhere deep beneath his hardened exterior, Levi had already begun to understand something terrifying. She wasn't going to leave Dot, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he wanted her to. The desert changed its mood as Levi Crow and Clara rode deeper into the broken mesa territory. The land grew harsher, the air heavier with the scent of dust and something unseen lurking beneath the quiet. Levi could feel it in the way Ironshade's ears twitched and in the tightening knot that had begun forming in his chest. 2 days after leaving Mercy Creek, he had spent years learning to read danger the way others read books, and every instinct he possessed whispered the same uneasy warning. They were being watched. Clara had spoken little during the ride, but Levi had grown accustomed to her silent presence behind him. She held the saddle with careful patience, never complaining about the long hours or blistering heat. Occasionally she would hum soft, uneven melodies that sounded like half-remembered lullabies. The sound unsettled him at first. Now it anchored him in ways he refused to admit. By midday, they stopped beside a dried watering hole scattered with skeletal remains of animals that hadn't survived the season. Levi crouched near the cracked earth, studying the faint impressions in the dust. Fresh tracks, multiple horses, moving north. He narrowed his eyes, tracing their direction with a gloved finger. Clara slid down from Ironshade, landing quietly beside him. She watched him examine the ground with an intensity far beyond her years. "Bad men?" she asked. Levi didn't answer immediately. He stood slowly, scanning the horizon where distant rock formations cast jagged shadows like broken teeth. "Maybe," he finally said. "Maybe worse." Clara studied his face carefully. She had begun learning the language of his expressions, the tightening of his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes when he calculated threats. She said nothing more, simply stepping closer to Ironshade and resting her hand against the horse's flank as if sensing the tension pulsing through both man and animal. Levi mounted again and reached down, lifting her effortlessly into place behind him. As they rode forward, he felt her small arms wrap around his waist for the first time instead of gripping his coat. The gesture startled him. It felt instinctive, trusting, and dangerously unfamiliar. The wind picked up, carrying whispers of distant thunder, though the sky remained cloudless. Levi didn't like storms he couldn't see coming. They reached the abandoned mining town of Silver Vein just before dusk. Rotting wooden structures leaned dangerously against one another, their empty windows staring like hollow eyes into the desert. Rusted mining carts rested along broken rails, and the wind whistled through collapsed rooftops with mournful persistence. Levi had passed through Silver Vein years ago when it still held life and greed in equal measure. Now it felt like a graveyard that refused to settle. "This place safe?" Clara asked softly. "No places," Levi replied. Dismounting, "But it's shelter." He guided Ironshade toward the old sheriff's office, one of the few buildings still standing upright. Inside, dust coated everything in thick gray layers, and sunlight spilled through cracks in the ceiling like fractured beams of memory. Levi cleared a corner, spreading his worn bedroll across the floor while Clara explored quietly, her fingers brushing across faded wanted posters still clinging to the walls. She paused in front of one poster, studying the rough charcoal sketch. "That looks like you," she said. Levi turned sharply. The poster displayed his name beneath the crude drawing, labeled with a bounty from years ago, a mistake he had spent half his life outrunning. He walked over slowly, ripping the poster from the wall and crumpling it in his fist. "Old trouble," he muttered. Clara didn't ask further. Instead, she sat beside him, her small presence radiating quiet acceptance. Levi lit a lantern, its warm glow pushing back the encroaching darkness outside. The wind grew louder, rattling loose boards and carrying distant echoes that sounded almost like voices. As night settled, Levi sat awake near the doorway, revolver resting across his knee while Clara slept curled beneath his coat. He watched her chest rise and fall steadily, and something unfamiliar pressed against his ribs, a protective urgency he hadn't felt since childhood. Before the world carved him into something harder, the boards outside creaked under sudden weight. Levi's eyes snapped toward the sound. The attack came without warning. The front door exploded inward under the force of a heavy boot, splintering wood across the room. 3 figures stormed inside, their faces hidden behind dark bandanas, rifles raised and ready. Levi moved faster than thought, shoving Clara behind the overturned desk as gunfire shattered the lantern and plunged the room into flickering shadow. Bullets tore through the walls as Levi fired back with lethal precision. The confined space filled with thunderous echoos and choking dust. One outlaw collapsed instantly, his rifle clattering across the floor. Another lunged forward, swinging the butt of his gun toward Levi's head. Levi ducked, slamming his shoulder into the attacker's chest and driving him through a collapsing wall. Clara remained hidden, her small body trembling, but silent as chaos erupted around her. She clutched Levi's coat tightly, burying her face in its worn fabric as splinters rained down around her. Outside, the third attacker mounted his horse, shouting to unseen companions in the darkness. Levi fired one last shot that shattered the rider's shoulder, sending him tumbling into the dust before galloping hooves retreated into the night. Silence fell again, broken only by the crackling remains of the shattered lantern. Levi staggered slightly, pressing his hand against his side where blood seeped through torn fabric. Clara rushed toward him, her wide eyes scanning his injury with fierce concentration. "You're hurt," she whispered. "It's nothing," he grunted, though the pain burned fiercely beneath his ribs. Clara grabbed a strip of cloth from his saddlebag and pressed it firmly against the wound. Her hands shook, but her determination remained unbreakable. Levi watched her carefully, surprised by the steadiness behind her fear. "You're tougher than you look," he muttered. Clara met his gaze with quiet certainty. "So are you." They left Silver Vein before dawn, knowing the attackers would return with reinforcements. Levi's wound slowed him, though he refused to show weakness. Clara remained alert throughout the journey, watching the horizon with watchful intensity far beyond her years. By late afternoon, Levi's strength faltered. His vision blurred slightly as he guided Ironshade toward a narrow canyon that offered shade and concealment. He slid from the saddle, landing heavily against the rock wall as dizziness surged through him. Clara jumped down immediately, her voice trembling for the first time. "Levi, I'm fine," he insisted, though his knees buckled beneath him. Clara helped him lower himself against the canyon wall. She retrieved water and forced him to drink, then carefully cleaned his wound using supplies from his saddlebag. Levi watched her work, astonished by her composure. "Where'd you learn to do that?" he asked weakly. "My mama," Clara said quietly. Before, her voice trailed off, but Levi understood. He placed a rough hand gently over hers, an awkward, unfamiliar gesture that carried more meaning than either of them could explain. "You ain't alone now," he said. Clara nodded, tears glistening but refusing to fall. Night descended cold and unforgiving across the canyon. Levi drifted in and out of fevered dreams while Clara remained awake beside him, feeding the fire and watching the shadows. Hours passed before distant hoof beats echoed faintly through the rocks. Clara's body stiffened. She shook Levi gently, her voice urgent but controlled. "They're coming back." Levi forced himself upright, pain slicing through his chest. He listened carefully, counting the approaching riders by the rhythm of hooves bouncing against canyon stone. 5, maybe 6. He loaded his revolver slowly, each movement deliberate. "Clara," he said, his voice steady despite exhaustion. "You hide behind those rocks when shooting starts." She shook her head fiercely. "No, that ain't a choice." "Yes, it is," she insisted, her voice shaking but unyielding. "I stay with you." Levi stared at her, stunned by the fierce loyalty burning in her small frame. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he nodded once, accepting the reality he could no longer deny. "Then stay close," he said quietly. The riders burst into the canyon moments later, guns blazing as echoes shattered the stillness. Levi rose, standing between Clara and the charging outlaws despite his injury. He fired with deadly accuracy, each shot echoing with relentless determination. Clara crouched behind him, clutching his coat tightly as bullets ricocheted across the stone walls. The battle raged like a storm trapped inside the canyon. One by one, the attackers fell or fled, their confidence crumbling beneath Levi's unwavering defense. When the final rider disappeared into the desert night, Levi collapsed to one knee, breath ragged and vision spinning. Clara caught him before he hit the ground. Dawn painted the canyon in pale amber light as Levi slowly regained consciousness. Clara sat beside him, her small hand wrapped firmly round his as if anchoring him to the world. Ironshade stood nearby, watchful and calm, as though guarding them both. "You saved me," Levi murmured, his voice rough with exhaustion. Clara shook her head. "You saved me first." Levi studied her quietly, realizing something profound had shifted inside him. The desert, once his sanctuary, no longer felt empty. The road ahead no longer felt solitary. For the first time in years, Levi Crow understood that survival meant more than outlasting danger. It meant protecting something worth living for. He slowly pushed himself upright, ignoring the lingering pain as he helped Clara onto Ironshade once more. He climbed into the saddle, settling into place with determined resolve. "Where are we going now?" Clara asked softly. Levi gazed toward the rising sun stretching across endless desert plains. His voice carried a strength Clara had never heard before, steady, certain, and filled with something that sounded dangerously close to hope. "Somewhere safe," he said. Clara rested her head against his back, her arms wrapping around him. As Ironshade began moving forward into the golden horizon, Levi Crow had once believed the desert carved men into legends through isolation and survival alone. But as Clara held tightly behind him, he realized legends weren't forged by solitude. They were forged by the people who refused to leave your side, even when the world demanded they should. And Levi Crow, the feared hollow cowboy, rode forward no longer as a man running from his past, but as a man riding toward something he never believed he deserved, a future.